I think it's pretty easy to argue that UFC London this coming weekend is headlined and co-headlined by two #1 contender fights, and the first one in the main event of the evening is in the 170-pound welterweight division, as the former champion Leon Rocky Edwards will look to get back on track in his first fight since losing his title at UFC 304 last July to Belal Muhammad, and in order to do so, he will have to take on the 17-1 surging Sean Brady, coming into this fight after a big win over Gilbert Burns in his most recent outing in 2024, and the newfound dad strength could be the key to success for Sean Brady. And what is all but on paper to be a striker versus grappler, a tale as old as time in the UFC, something's got to give, and someone has to put their name in the hat to get the winner of the title fight coming up in May. July 27th, 2024. That is the first time that Leon Edwards had tasted defeat since December 19th of 2015. Sandwiched in between those two losses was a 12-fight win streak, a title fight victory, and 2 title defenses. Leon Rocky Edwards went from a relatively unknown to one of the biggest stars in European mixed martial arts history. And that all started with the head kick heard around the world in August of 2022 at UFC 278, or in his rematch with Kamaru Usman dating back to December of 2015. Nearly 7 years later is when Leon Edwards would get revenge against Usman, but it wouldn't come easy. As we all know, Leon Edwards was down in that fight and on the brink of defeat when heading into that 5th round, his coach pleaded with him.
Listen, stop feeling sorry for your well, come on then. What's wrong with you? You're too now. You gotta pull the out of fire.
And that is exactly what Leon Edwards did. He dug deep and pulled off one of the most mesmerizing knockouts in UFC history, a head kick knockout, and just a knockout in general that truly to this day I can remember vividly watching it with my friends in my buddy's apartment, standing up on his couch, scaring his dog half to death, and started barking at me, and I was utterly left speechless. I was standing up, hands up on my head, and didn't have any words to say. It was that memorable and insane of a knockout, and it made Leon Edwards a star and a champion. Then we know that Leon will go on to win the trilogy with Kamaru Usman by defending the belt and getting a decision victory where he really showed the evolution of his skill set, and then you can pretty much copy and paste that performance to his performance against Colby Covington in December of 2023 at UFC 296, where Leon would defend his title for the second time and virtually shut out the former interim champion that is Colby Chaos. And in an attempt to defend his title for the 3rd time in his home country of England, he would go up against Belal Muhammad, and oh boy, did they have history as well. Heading into that fight in July of 2024, combined, Leon Edwards and Belal Muhammad were on a 21-fight win streak and a 23-fight unbeaten streak. Notice that there was one kind of unbeaten wording for each of their streaks, and that is because they fought each other back in 2021, where the fight would end via no contest because of a nasty eye poke from Leon Edwards to Belal Muhammad that hindered him unable to see at least clear enough to continue on in that fight. They would go their separate ways and finally be reunited 3 years later last July. And that is where, much like Leon Edwards shut out Colby Covington, Belal Muhammad would shut out Leon Edwards and become the new welterweight champion of the world over the course of a 25-minute unanimous decision victory, where Belal looked honestly better than he had ever looked before. And it wasn't just the grappling and the wrestling and the pace that he set forth that we're used to seeing, but he outstruck Leon Edwards pretty much for the entirety of the fight. And now, after a near 8-month hiatus for the former champion, Leon Edwards is back, and he is back once again in his home country of England, and he looks to right the wrongs of his title fight loss last year, make good, deliver for the home crowd, and get back into the title picture. And standing in his way is the relative short notice replacement Sean Brady, and that is because this fight was originally supposed to be Leon Edwards versus Jack Della Maddalena. Jack Della Maddalena, undefeated in 7 or 8 UFC fights now since coming in off of the Contender Series a few years ago. He was supposed to be returning for over a year-long hiatus to face Leon after he had to go through some nasty infections and I believe a broken arm or some sort of broken bone. And that was going to be an absolutely electric fight. Jackie Moon, one of my favorite fighters in the UFC at this point, but he was pulled from this fight with Leon Edwards, but not because of another injury, not because of an illness, but because he got put in a title fight against Belal Muhammad in May at UFC 315, and that is because the number one contender at 170, Shavkat Rakhmonov, is injured and could not make the turnaround time from December to May due to that injury to face Belal. In step Jack Della Maddalena, and now at London, in steps Sean Brady. Sean Brady is 17-1 overall in his career and 7-1 in the UFC since debuting back in October of 2019. He started his UFC tenure 5-0 with some very convincing victories over that span, but then that undefeated record and that momentum would be halted by, of course, none other than Belal, remember the name Muhammad, the current champion of the world. That first loss for Sean Brady came back at UFC 280 in October of 2022, where not only would he lose to Belal Muhammad, but he would get knocked out on the feet by Belal. And following that loss, we would not see Sean Brady return for nearly 14 months as he would come back in December of 2023 and make good on the layoff with a vicious Kimura submission victory over Kelvin Gastelum, the former interim title challenger at middleweight, and then extend his win streak to 2 by taking on his biggest test to date, Gilbert Burns, in September of 2024. Well, I guess second biggest test to date after Belal, right? It just kind of seems that it weighs out that way. That fight would be Sean Brady's first ever UFC main event, and he would get the 25-minute unanimous decision win over Gilbert Burns, where he put on a full display of his arsenal of weapons. Typically, he's been known for his grappling and wrestling, but in that fight with Gilbert, he not only utilized those skills, but he looked very good on the feet and showed a lot of improvements pretty much anywhere that the fight went, and anything that Gilbert wanted to do, Sean could do better. And there's some added motivation for Sean Brady because not only is he taking this fight on short notice, not only is he taking it in enemy territory in England, not only is a potential championship fight on the line should he win this bout, but he's now a new father, having his first baby back in February, which is actually a really cool story. I've heard him say it on a couple of podcasts now. February 9th is when his first baby was born, and it was on the very same night that his Philadelphia Eagles won the Super Bowl. He said it was one of the best days of his life, and rightfully so. His team wins the Super Bowl. He has his first child. His wife and baby are doing well, and they're healthy. And just a few days later is when he gets the call to come in on short notice and take on the former champion Leon Edwards in the biggest opportunity of his MMA career. And I said there at the beginning, right, that it's a tale as old as time. It's the striker in Leon Edwards versus the grappler in Sean Brady. But I think it's pretty obvious that both of these fighters have showed that they have weapons in all facets of mixed martial arts. They can get it done in the opposing fighter's territory, right? Sean Brady, if he elects to, can stand and trade with Leon Edwards, and I believe have success. And on the flip side, I believe that if Leon Edwards gets a takedown offensively, he could make some things happen there against Sean Brady, known as the grappler. Now, of course, I'm not saying that that's how either guy is going to approach the fight. If I had to guess and put money on it, I believe that Leon Edwards is going to want to keep this fight standing for as long as he can, whether that be 5 minutes and he gets a knockout or 25 minutes and he gets a decision. And the same can be said for Sean Brady. He will look to press forward. He will look to put Leon Edwards on his back foot with his lethal striking that he possesses. He wants to eliminate that and grapple, take Leon down, and he says get a submission in either rounds 2 or 3. And I think this absolutely is a number one contender fight, which, of course, I'm not saying the winner of this jumps Shavkat Rakhmonov. He's done everything there is to do and then some to remain the number one contender, including putting his title opportunity on hold, taking on Ian Machado Gary when Belal Muhammad was injured in December, risking it all essentially, and still coming out on top with a victory over Ian Machado Gary. And, by the way, still undefeated. What is he now? 19-0? But at least it seems pretty straightforward that Belal Muhammad will defend against Jack Della Maddalena in May, then more than likely, before the end of 2025, the winner of that will take on Shavkat Rakhmonov, and then we will have the winner between Brady and Leon probably get their title fight in early to mid 2026. Now, Sean Brady, for what it's worth, has said he will fight again. He doesn't want to really wait around on the couch in the meantime after, in his words, he beats Leon Edwards. So I can't blame him there, but maybe we'll just wait and see, because it's a little risky to just throw away a title shot that you've earned. And if Leon should be victorious here, I absolutely could see him just waiting out to get his opportunity. He realizes that there's only so many chances he can get to reclaim a title that he once held, and I believe he'll do everything in his power to hold that contendership status. But I want to hear from you all in the comments below. One, your predictions for this fight. How do you see it going? Will Leon Edwards strike his way to a finish or outpoint Brady on the feet to a decision? Or will Sean Brady get that submission that he is chasing, or even utilize his wrestling and grappling to get a convincing decision in his own right? And regardless of who wins, do you believe that this is a number one contender fight? Whether that's Sean Brady, who is currently number 5, whether that's Leon Edwards, who is currently number 1, will the winner of the UFC London main event be next in line for a welterweight title shot? And now that we are done with the main event discussion, let's get into the other number one contendership fight, and that is in the light heavyweight division, where we'll see the former champion Jan Blachowicz taking on the surging Carlos Black Jag Ulberg. The Polish power will return to the UFC octagon for the first time in 20 months. That's right, Jan Blachowicz, the former light heavyweight champion, has not fought since July 29th of 2023. In that fight, it was the light heavyweight debut of Alex Poatan Pereira at UFC 291, and it was a razor-close split decision where, yes, Pereira would win and go on to do amazing things at 205 pounds, but Jan Blachowicz was not going down that night without a fight. And part of the reason for this layoff for Jan Blachowicz is, I believe, 1 or even 2 pretty significant surgeries to his shoulder, so that is why he's been out. Pair that with him now being 42 years old, time is no longer on the side of Jan Blachowicz, but he is back now this weekend in London to prove he is still amongst the best of the best at 205 pounds, and maybe, just maybe, get himself a rematch and for the title again versus Magomed Ankalaev, the new light heavyweight champion. And while Blachowicz hasn't fought since July of 2023, he hasn't won a fight since May 14th of 2022 when he got a TKO over Alexander Rakic, but that was a fight where Rakic blew out his knee in that fight. So really, the last legitimate victory for Blachowicz was against Israel Adesanya, and that was in March of 2021. That's mind-boggling. And the other fight since that victory over Adesanya, when he looked to become a double champion during his middleweight reign of dominance, well, he fought and lost to Glover Teixeira, where Glover would become the light heavyweight champion. Then came the Rakic fight. Then Blachowicz, after that victory against Rakic, would get a vacant title opportunity against Magomed Ankalaev, where they would fight to a draw, leaving us with no light heavyweight champion. And then came the fight and split decision loss to Alex Poatan Pereira. So a lot of just inconsistencies here for Jan, a lot of mixed results, and a lot of inactivity. 2 fights in 2021 and 2022, which is great, but then only 1 fight in 2023, and obviously none in 2024 due to the layoff, the injuries that he suffered. So Jan Blachowicz, again, 42, he has to make the most of what little amount of time he has left, and unfortunately, his opponent, Carlos Ulberg, is no easy task. Outside of the newly crowned champion, Magomed Ankalaev, there's not another fighter in this light heavyweight division with as much momentum as Carlos Ulberg, who enters this fight with Blachowicz on a 7-fight win streak, with 5 of them coming by way of stoppage. And he's coming in off the tails of his biggest victories yet, both of them in 2024, a 12-second knockout over Alonzo Minifield, and a decision victory over former title challenger Volkan Oezdemir. That came back in November. So if he can make it 8 wins in a row and a victory over a former champion in Jan Blachowicz, he is undeniable at this point in the light heavyweight division. Yes, it seems all but certain that Ankalaev and Pereira are going to run it back, which I have no issue with. Their fight at UFC 313 was pretty competitive, all things considered. Not that it was the most memorable or barn burner fight that you'll ever see, but it was close and back and forth. Plus, you pair that with Pereira doing all that he's done, including 3 title defenses in this weight class, that pretty much justifies a rematch. But I would say that Blachowicz or Ulberg, whoever that may be, will absolutely be next for the title. And absolutely, if Ulberg wins, it should not be even in discussion of anyone else but him. And Ulberg comes from the City Kickboxing camp down there with Israel Adesanya, Dan Hooker, mixing it in with Alexander Volkanovski from time to time, Tai Bam Bam Tuivasa, all of those very highly touted fighters, and all of the young up-and-comers still in that camp that we've yet to see. That is one of the most close-knit groups in all of mixed martial arts, and it's one of the most successful groups in all of mixed martial arts. And Carlos Ulberg is their representative at 205 pounds, and so you know, coming from that group, he is going to look to keep this on the feet, stand, trade, and look for a knockout to solidify himself as the next guy up. And for Blachowicz, obviously we know that he carries that legendary Polish power that got him to the big dance and to become the light heavyweight champion of the world a few years ago. But he is very well versed in all facets of mixed martial arts, and actually to this day has more submission victories on his record than knockouts. I spoke too soon. It's tied now 9 apiece, but you get the point. The Polish power can get it done on the ground as well, and I feel like that's going to be his best path to victory here against the ultra dangerous striker that is Carlos Ulberg. So that's going to be a very interesting dynamic. Can Blachowicz compete with Ulberg on the feet? Can he find success there? Can he take the shots from Ulberg? And if not, can he get Ulberg to the ground? Can he keep him there enough to get a decision or to get the finish via ground and pound or submission? So much like the main event, give me your thoughts on the co-main event in the comments below, your predictions, your bets, and if you think, much like the main event, this is also a #1 contender fight, but this time in the light heavyweight division. Can Jan Blachowicz regain some momentum after the layoff, after the injuries, and put himself right back in the driver's seat to compete for gold once more? Or will Ulberg take out the seasoned veteran, take out the former champion, extend his win streak to 8, one of the largest win streaks that we will have ever seen in the light heavyweight division, and as a result of that, put himself in the driver's seat to challenge for a title for the first time in his career? And now that we are done with those two massive opportunities in the main and co-main event, let's touch on some of the other fun fights before we head on out of here today. In the featured bout, we will see arguably one of the most inactive fighters in the UFC at the moment versus undoubtedly the most active fighter in the UFC, Gunnar Nelson and Kevin Big Mouth Holland. And here's my stat of the weekend for you for this UFC London card. Gunnar Nelson made his UFC debut September 29th of 2012 and has competed 15 times in the promotion. And his opponent Kevin Holland made his debut August 4th, 2018 and has fought 24 times. That's right, in less than 7 years' time between August 2018 and March 22nd, 2025, this coming weekend, Kevin Holland will have made the walk to the octagon 25 times. There's no one more active in the UFC than Kevin Holland. There aren't many fighters more fun to watch in the UFC than Kevin Holland. However, all of those fights, all of the hype, all of the fun set aside, he comes into this bout having lost 4 of his last 5 bouts. And while he had a pretty decent year in 2023 going 2-1, in 2024 he went 1-3. But look at the competition. Look at the people that Kevin Holland is fighting. His most recent fight was in January against Reinier de Ridder, a 2-weight world champion in 1. Prior to that, it was against Roman Dolidze, where he would get injured and could not continue, so it was stopped in his corner. He would beat Mikhail Alexichek in the very first round in just over a minute and a half. Then he would lose to Michael Venom Page, the longtime Bellator veteran, turned pretty successful UFC middleweight and welterweight so far. And even before that, it's losses to Jack Della Maddalena, to Stephen Thompson, to Khamzat Chimaev. He's literally facing some of the best fighters in the world across 2 different weight classes for many years at this point. And don't get me wrong, Gunnar Nelson has been in there with some very high-level mixed martial artists throughout his career. It's just a lot more spread out. However, he does enter this fight on a 2-fight win streak, even though he hasn't fought since March 18th of 2023, so over 2 years ago. And that would be a first round submission via armbar against Brian Barberena, and his victory before that was against Takashi Soto via decision. But I talked about the high level competition of Kelvin Holland, and it wouldn't be fair to not mention the high level competition of Gunnar Nelson, because he's fought Gilbert Burns, he's fought Leon Edwards, Santiago Ponzinibbio, Damian Maia. He's been in there with some of the best in the world, and pretty similarly to Kevin Holland, when they get their biggest steps up in competition, they both tend to falter and lose. So something's got to give here in this one, in a very big fight between the two of them, fighting for what could potentially be a top 15 spot in the welterweight division. Gunnar Nelson has finished 17 of his 19 victories, with 13 of them coming by way of submission, and Kevin Holland has finished 22 of his 26 victories with a pretty even split, 14 knockouts and 8 submissions, a Swiss Army knife of offensive skills. I'm very intrigued on how this fight's going to go, with the activity of Kevin Holland, with the inactivity of Gunnar Nelson, and with the contrasting styles. Yes, both very well rounded, but let's be honest, Gunnar Nelson is going to want this fight on the ground, and he's going to want to get control time and get a submission. Kevin Holland is great on the ground from an offensive standpoint, but from a defensive standpoint, that is where he has struggled the most. But if he can fend off Gunnar Nelson, if he can keep it on the feet, his long, rangy, powerful striking could be enough to put away Gunnar. I'm definitely curious to hear what you all think about this fight in the comments below, and even give me your bold predictions. Meatball Molly McCann is on this card, which of course she's on the London card, and she's taking on a short notice replacement and UFC debutant, Alexia Thainara. Thainara is 27 years old, 11-1 as a professional fighter, and has finished 7 of her 11 fights. 6 of those by way of submission. And she will enter this fight on a 9-fight win streak, having not lost since November of 2019, and that was against a current fighting nerd, Bruna Brazil. And oddly enough, the last loss for Molly McCann was also against Bruna Brazil, but that was much more recently at UFC 304 last July in England. She would lose a decision there, and actually enters this fight having lost 3 of her last 4 bouts. She does have a victory in February of last year against Diana Belbita, and prior to that, back-to-back losses to Julia Storyalenko and Erin Blanchfield. At 34 years old, this is a very important crossroads fight for Molly McCann, because she cannot afford to go on a stretch of losing 4 out of 5 fights, and she's taking on someone that's coming in on short notice. But I will say that Alexia will be a very dangerous threat, especially with her submission background and Meatball Molly not being able to fend off submissions that great in her UFC career. In the featherweight fight, we have a potential fight of the night contender, and a fight that is definitely sliding under the radar, between Nathaniel Wood and Morgan Charriere. Nathaniel Wood will enter this fight having won 4 of his last 5 bouts, with the only loss coming to Muhammad Naimov, and his most recent outing was a victory against Daniel Pineda last July. 31 years old, right in his prime, from England, 20-6 overall, and has finished 13 out of his 20 victories. And for what it's worth, been finished in 4 of his 6 losses. And for the last pirate out of France, Morgan Charriere, he is 20-10-1, but don't let that record fool you. This is a very skilled and high-level mixed martial artist. He's 2-1 in the UFC and has won 5 of his last 6 bouts. His only loss in the promotion was to Chepe Mariscal, and that was a razor-thin split decision that came in April of last year. He has since bounced back with a second-round knockout over Gabriel Miranda. That was in September at UFC Paris. He is an electric striker, finishing 12 of his 20 victories by way of knockout. For what it's worth, has 3 submissions sprinkled in there. So we have 2 very well-rounded fighters, 2 very dangerous fighters, and 2 guys on the cusp of the top 15 in the featherweight division. We've got a banger loading in the lightweight division between Jai Herbert and Chris Padilla. The Black Country banger Jai Herbert is 36 years old and has finished 10 of his 13 victories, 9 of those by way of the knockout. He comes into this one after a decision win last August over Rolando Bedoya, and prior to that had a loss to Faris Ziam, who's on a tear right now. And for the 15-6, 29-year-old Chris Padilla, he has finished 13 out of 15 victories with 8 knockouts, 5 submissions, and he had a huge UFC debut in April of last year where he submitted James Lontop and then made good on his second UFC appearance with a brutal knockout against Rong Zhu that came in September. All in all, he's on a 5-fight win streak, all 5 of them by way of finish. This man is electric to watch and ultra dangerous anywhere the fight goes. And last but not least, we've got some ranked big boys on the prelims. Marcin Tybura, the longtime UFC veteran, current ranked number 8 heavyweight in the world, will be taking on the surging number 13 ranked Mick Parkin. Tybura continues to prove, even at 39 years old, that he can put away veterans and up-and-coming prospects alike. He's coming in off of a victory over Gennady Deniz back in November at UFC 309, and he had another victory in 2024 against Tai Tuivasa where he submitted him. And the loss in 2024, sandwiched in between there, was to Sergey Spivak, a top 10 heavyweight in the world. And the experience differential between these two fighters is what I believe will be the biggest factor in this fight, whether that be for Tybura taking advantage of it or for Mick Parkin proving it wrong. This will be Tybura's 22nd fight in the UFC and his 36th overall, whereas Mick Parkin will enter the octagon for the 5th time, well, technically 6th if you count the Contender Series since it is in the UFC octagon after all, and just his 11th fight as a pro. However, he is undefeated at the moment, 10-0 with 7 finishes, 6 of them by knockout, 29 years young, right in his prime. What's going to be the factor? Will it be the veteran expertise of Tybura and all of the high-level competition, or the younger upside of Mick Parkin and the devastating finishing power? So that is it for the UFC London preview, and honestly, there's more fights on this card that are going to be fun and are going to produce very fun results, I have no doubt. But from a storyline and at-stake perspective, those are the ones that I wanted to touch on today. So if there are any that you wanted to hear about that I didn't touch on, feel free to give me your thoughts on them in the comments below. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Every single week I preview and discuss the biggest storylines and what is at stake for all of the best fights heading into each weekend, and I recap the most meaningful results coming out of each card as well. I also give my thoughts and opinions on MMA news and fight announcements. You can join the community on social media at VerbalSpar MMA on X, Instagram, and TikTok, and you can follow on your favorite audio listening platform where every Monday and Friday podcast episodes release on Spotify, Apple, and more. Have a great weekend, enjoy the fights, and I will see you in the next video.